Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of Fintech Ki Baat Dil Se. Today we have with us Mr. Yatir Zaluski, the founder of ConfirmU. ConfirmU is an Israel-based startup that's now expanding into India. And you know what's special about them? It's the fact that they are able to tell how much is your ability to pay and whether or not you will be a good borrower just by making you play a game. So Yatir, thank you so much for your time and thank you so much for joining us. Would quickly love to hear about a bit of your background and what ConfirmU does from you. Over to you.
Thanks, Rayaz, for hosting us as part of this podcast. Really,
Pleasure.
thanks for the opportunity. So, a little bit about myself. CEO and founder of ConfirmU, coming from Tel Aviv, Israel. And my background is a combination of both tech and financials. Before starting ConfirmU, I used to work, with global MNCs, Israeli tech companies in North America, Europe, and Southeast Asia, helping them, transform their businesses through changing their information system and financial reporting. The way I came about to start this venture was, a personal case that I've, experienced here in Israel. My family actually rents an apartment in one of the provincial areas of Israel. And apparently a lot of people that, showed up as potential tenants to apply for a rent were people that did not have any bank accounts.
Okay.
Those people, the paradigm is by landlords that if you don't have any bank account, that you're most likely to be a fraudulent person. And so why should I give you my property? You're most likely, to default on the rent. And to some extent, you might also, damage the property. I don't want you. So I thought to myself, there must be a better way to actually democratize this process and to actually help landlords understand that this is a wrong paradigm. Let's try to change that. Back at the time in 2017, 18, I thought that, the best way to engage people would be through a chatbot. It's quite fashionable. Why not, post them questions and understand based on their answers, their actual intent. So this is what I started thinking, maybe.
It was back in 2018.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome.
So I thought that, if we look at how people react based on questions, we can actually understand their intent. So I've looked at some, psychology books and researches, and I found that there's some way, to actually map words, at least in the English language, to an intent. I've came across, basic models in psychology. By the way, I'm not a psychologist. I'm a financial person by my background. But I came to this research and I thought, nobody's actually doing this. Why not, look at that? During, my research, I was approached by a lady who asked me, hey, why don't you have a cool idea? Why don't you come over and, pitch this, as part of a startup bootcamp in London? And so I did, I took the opportunity and came over there and I pitched this idea. And a lot of the people that listened to my pitch were people originally from India, staying in the UK. And they told me, wow, this could be a great solution, but think of a bigger problem, which is financial inclusion.
Right.
And why don't you think of India as a good way to start? And so I did. The problem is that, as an entrepreneur, you get excited from your ideas and a lot of people that like it. But when you land on the ground in India, people told me, look, Yatir, well, that's great. But in India, we have 29 formal languages and 207 informal languages. How could your product scale? Every 50 kilometers in India, people speak different tone and different kind of dialect. How would your product scale? And I thought, okay, this is the time, to think of how to actually pivot this. So I came to an understanding that people actually react better with images and interaction, which are mostly like game-like closer. And we've pivoted a bit. And The next encounter when I came to India was through someone I met, a really, inspiring entrepreneur, Mohammed Riaz of Bridge to Capital.
Mm-hmm.
And when I landed, he met me at Gurgaon, and he took me to a tour at a Tier 4 city in Rajasthan. And my encounter was quite amazing because he told me, look, I want your game to actually identify for lenders and myself who are those people who are most likely to be, inspirational, motivated entrepreneurs that, would not walk, after they finish their working day at 5:30 to have dinner at their mother's-in-law. And instead, I want you to identify people who will do anything, to make their business thrive. And we want to see those people having, skin in the game. So this is where the first version of what we have today, more of a game, came to actual testing in Rajasthan. And the results were quite surprisingly good. And right now, I think we've evolved ever since then. And I think we have a few other customers in India that are quite happy with this, and globally. It's not just about India, it's a world known problem where around 4 billion people don't have access to credit. And I think that through a game, we can actually get to a lot of people that are illiterate and they don't know how to read and write. That's the genesis.
Definitely, that is super interesting. I mean, from the problem of not able to give out your place for rental to people who would otherwise be, actually pretty pretty trustworthy, but since they don't have bank account, they are deemed as untrustworthy or basically probably categorized as someone who would probably default on rent and they're not given rent, to identifying an entire market of almost 1 million people who would essentially need credit in the going future. So I mean, I'm pretty sure you have heard this statement when we like all of us in India as well as in a lot of places in Southeast Asia talk about the next billion, right? Now building finances for the next billion. And these are the technologies that will essentially help deeper penetration. And these are the kind of entities that will push that inclusion. Because right now, if you look at traditional NBFCs in India or traditional banks in India, the lending landscape is so regulated that, and there are so many, guidelines and all of that around it, that you wouldn't want to, as a lender, you wouldn't want to take risk in giving loans out to people who are even slightly, out of the comfort zone of your organization, because ultimately you become liable if some basically lending landscape in India right now is such that there are a lot of startups who partner with NBFCs and go out and lend, right? So in this case, as a regulated entity, now you are the one who becomes responsible for any activity that the startup or your partner does, right? The loan service provider or digital lending app does. So in this case, these kind of more and more underwriting apps and underwriting mechanisms that come by could actually help push lending to the next billion. I mean, this is really interesting. Before coming to the India market, I would want to take a step back and talk about Israel, right? So a lot of people in India, when we talk about fintech, we talk about, and this is not on basis of any bias or something, but we always talk about, let's say, Eastern Europe. We would talk about Southeast Asia. We would talk about Vietnam, Singapore, Israel, Tel Aviv. Probably not the first country that comes to mind when we talk about fintech, or at least a lot of people are not aware about what's happening in the ecosystem. So would want to hear from you on what's happening there. What are the innovations that you have seen in Israel, and how's the market like, for a better understanding of that ecosystem?
Great, good question. I think most of the fintechs that are here are focused on innovations around payments. They're coming right now. We're seeing a new wave of startups that are also trying to focus on lending. I think there is one unicorn which is famous, and they're actually operating in India, called Payoneer, which are doing cross-border payments. There's also one, fintech unicorn, which is called Lemonade, which is actually innovating on the insurance space. They operate in the US.
Okay.
What We're also seeing a lot of crypto companies coming out of Israel that are working in that space. But unfortunately, some of them aren't right in the right context, like Celsius, which was, an Israeli-U.S. crypto bank that basically went bankrupt because of what happened recently in the crypto space. But
Right.
I think that there's a lot of great ideas. Unfortunately, not all of them are coming into Southeast Asia and India in specific, and I think that's a big miss for Israeli startups. They still don't see India and Southeast Asia as an opportunity as a big market, and I think that's the rooted problem is with the VC ecosystem in Israel. When I told them that I'm going to India and I think that's a great market, the first answer that came into their mind, why aren't you in the US? So I told them, you are not seeing where the innovation is coming from and the opportunity is coming from. And we see a lot of US investors actually putting the money right now and betting on India. And the VCs here still needs to be re-educated in a sense that, there's a big market, huge opportunity in India, a lot of space to innovate. I was actually present in one fintech event in the US, and the question that came into mind by one of the moderators was, how come we're so bad behind Southeast Asia in our fintech innovation? And the main answer was, it's an over-regulated market, the US market. So I think, here in Israel, what I'm trying to convey is like, look, there's a huge opportunity in India. You guys should be, on the planes, just coming in and seeing what happens there. UPI, NPCI, it's a great, all the countries outside of India are adopting this. I think this should be like one of the prides and symbols in the Indian flag. I mean, this adoption outside of India by UPI. Nobody seems to be paying attention here on this, remarkable achievement. That's what I think.
Definitely, I think you made a few great points. Although a lot of other countries also have seen startups building either for the West, building towards US. But when you look at the real opportunity is when there are a lot of people in countries like India, Vietnam, and other places where they haven't had access to financial services yet or have a very partial access. And to essentially include them into the financial ecosystem is where the next opportunity lies for fintechs, is what I personally feel.
Yeah.
If you were to draw parallels between, let's say, the Israeli landscape around fintech from a perspective of how it has evolved, how the regulations are versus how you have seen the India market evolve, or how you see the current state of Indian market, how would it be?
So one important point, the government here in Israel is trying to invest a lot of money and boost the Israeli tech system by giving grants from the Innovation Authority. I think that's one of the main engine drivers of growth of the Israeli startup ecosystem, government support. Nonetheless, this is a small market. We're only 9 million people. That's not even, comes into a size of Chennai or a tier 1 city in India. So there's not much room to grow over here. A lot of the startups are always being educated. You need to scale and work in a big global market. One of the things, that I'm seeing is, that, there are government initiatives in India around financial inclusion and boosting, investing more money on ecosystem. But I think there's still a gap, in taking the risk. The government, I think, in India needs to invest more and take more risk on startups and promote them. I think India by itself, the people that I meet there over and over, Bangalore is like, even better than Silicon Valley. There's a great spirit of entrepreneurs out there. but there are some towns that are not getting the right, attention. I think like, Calcutta, for example,
True.
the ecosystem there needs to be much more promoted by the government, and more funds needs to go to this kind of a place. So the more the government encourages entrepreneurs to take more risk, I think, we'll see. Even I think India is like third ranked, among investment in startup ecosystem.
Yep.
I think it's most likely to be, competing over the second and first, in the next decades. But in order for that, that leapfrog to happen, the government needs to spend more money on this to promote it.
Definitely, I agree. And actually, from the fact that government needs to invest money, the problem is here that the startup founders, who are essentially early stage founders, are not even aware about the initiatives that are run. A lot of initiatives that are run by the government of India. So there are a lot of initiatives that earlier we were also, as a part of the Fintech Yatra that we were doing, we had the option to essentially, give grants to startups who are eligible of up to rupees 10 lakhs and 50 lakhs as well. And we were running accelerators that would essentially, do that. But building that awareness in the ecosystem was a huge pain. Like, there are so many startups out there, but getting the word out to them, getting them to apply to that, and having them come down and pitch for it was another main problem, right? So even though we had a very hands-on model wherein we would go down to various cities and basically talk to these founders face to face, we still were probably able to capture just 5% of the active market, startup market at that point of time, is what I would it's probably just a guesstimate, but I think that's probably where we are at. So even though there are a lot of initiatives that are announced and they are done in a way which is kind of silent, what happens is you'll have to either visit a website, a government's website called Startup India, and there are a lot of nested pages under there wherein you would go and you'd figure out if these are the eligibility criteria, and if I fit in there, these are the grants that I could apply for, these are the accelerators that the government runs. So there is also, for example, something called Atal Incubation Centers that the government runs, right? And there are almost more than 100 of Atal Incubation Centers out there right now. Specific thematic centers on various technologies, there are incubation centers on solar energy, renewable energy, fintech, AI/ML, and all of that. But awareness of that this thing actually exists, that awareness is pretty low, and I think that is also something that needs to be really pushed. It needs to be marketed. Yeah,
I think I don't know how, if there's like innovation programs in universities or colleges. One channel that I would recommend, is to push this by, a program, a dedicated program, like a PI program for any student that does, is graduating his first degree in the university, that he will have some kind of a program around innovation. That's how I think you can actually penetrate and root the entrepreneurship, spirit in India through the education system.
Totally agree. As of now, I would say top 5% of universities in India probably have these kind of programs, e-cells and incubation centers like IIMs, IITs, and a few other well-known institutes. But when you dig one level deeper into the tier 2 colleges, you wouldn't probably find an active or an impactful e-cell. They would have something just for the name, for the sake of it, but there wouldn't be anything more than paper presentations going on there. So that is also something that really needs to be done well. Awesome. So I think that was really interesting. Coming back to what you essentially do, right? You said that you essentially use gamification to identify whether a person's credit worthiness, right? So would want to know more about that. How do you do that? What is the kind of game that you essentially make them play, and how do you identify the credit worthiness? What if you could take us through the journey, a customer journey?
So I think, just to wrap, the initial point that I mentioned, gaming is the lowest common denominator every person on this planet have. I mean, when we're born as babies, our mothers are, teaching us, why don't you play even That's the earliest interaction that a baby has.
True.
And I think that's the idea behind it. Everybody, all those people who are literate, I mean, they would know how to sometimes, engage digital experiences like, filling out a loan form. Instead, a combination of, engagement through image selection and then understanding basic behavioral situation is the best way to understand who you are and what's your relation to money and your attitudes towards spending. What we do is basically give a game which is localized and culturalized. And at the end of the day, lending is a matter of culture. We try to embed as much as cultural elements within the game. But as a start, we actually, apologies, ask the applicant who is playing the game to select play emojis which he best empathize with. So, for example, we have the game into several verticals, like gig workers in tier 1 cities and rural people. So even the outfits are suited to those people. That's one thing, on the experience. And then we ask him to run basically a series of questions or images. He or she needs to select one image out of a pair of 2 or a pair of 3. And through that, we can actually decipher something like 10 personality traits.
Okay.
Those 10 personality traits are based on 4 models of psychology, which we're incorporating into our assessment. And one of them is a well-known Big 5 model that stands for an acronym called OCEAN. And these are openness, conscientiousness, extraversion, agreeableness, and eroticism, where the conscientiousness person is the most, trait that we're interested in actually understanding whether the person is minded about his day-to-day life obligations tomorrow. He has locus of control of the actions he's about to take. And at the same time, also understand whether the person is aspirational enough to actually grow his business. So it serves 2 types of personas, basically the entrepreneurial one and basically the one person who knows he needs to pay tomorrow his utility bill. So through the game itself, and we're also embedding numeracy because we found that numerical abilities do correlate with intent to repay. So after that 3-minute game is over, we actually give the borrower some kind of personality assessment as an added value for him, for playing the game. And then we send also a score to the lender in the back end. That actually is the one thing that differentiates us, because within 3 minutes, we can take somebody who doesn't have anything, no past performance, nothing, and make him, credit worthy. That's the major thing. I also want to add that, I think that, banks, specifically banks I'm talking here, are getting the idea that, gaming is the next best engagement that, they can have with their audiences. I also think that they're losing on a great opportunity market with teens. So teens worldwide, from the age of 10 to 18 are playing mobile games, and they're playing all days on these kind of computer games. I think that the next bank has to actually look at, becoming a game. The onboarding will be entirely there. And it's enough to see DBS Bank, for example, looking at the metaverse to actually entertain this kind of an experience and onboarding, to understand that this is the next thing. Now, if banks don't look and pay attention to a segment of those teens, another entrepreneur, a fintech entrepreneur, can come and take it over, and he can build a game that actually addresses that. We're also seeing that in India. I think there are some fintech platforms that are looking at teens, and I think banks should be cautious, and they should collaborate with this kind of fintechs because India is a young country, and a lot of those people, they can become a captive audience of those fintechs.
No, true. I completely agree with you. So there are a few successful fintechs that have actually tapped into the teens market and enable them to spend using a card, using the prepaid card model or a junior account model. And these have been fairly successful with the gamification and the kind of marketing that these guys are doing on the social media platforms. But the way also we probably all kind of see this moving forward is that these kind of fintechs won't be able to do any of these without partnership with banks, right? Because in India, the way these regulations have been structured, ultimately what is happening is these fintechs are riding on bank stacks, be it a prepaid card that is taken using a PPI license or a bank's license, or be it a savings account that these guys enable these kids to open once they become 18. So that is also using a neobank stack. So in India, there is no true neobank. Everything is essentially linked to a bank's API, and you open an account with the bank and you become just the experience layer over it. You cannot ultimately become someone who takes deposits and keeps it with yourself and then do it that way, the way it happens in a few other countries that I've seen. So that kind of won't take away the entire market from the banks per se, but what will happen is bank will lose control of the way their customers experience their products, because there will be an experience layer in between, right? So the control will probably kind of move away from banks to fintechs.
I have maybe a rebel opinion on this. I think the regulator in that case, and we see it also here in Israel. I mean, they're more into protecting banks rather than protecting or giving the opportunities to the population. I mean, that's the people. And I think that kind of a stand needs to change. And we're seeing a lot of, senior politicians talking about, growth and GDP. That can only happen when you change your mindset and you decide, okay, I want to be truthful with my intentions, and if I want to make things happen and reform, then I should give a chance to those neobanks and give a chance to those populations to actually grow. That's how you actually make innovation happen. And if you don't want to take that, at least be truthful with your narratives and messages, and saying, let's calm down. I can understand that, in terms of recession, or when, there's a global, turmoil in the financial world, and we're seeing right now. So they don't want to take any risk. But going forward, I think that's the preferred way that central banks needs to adopt, and make innovation happen. Otherwise, other countries we know will be front runners.
Sorry. Yeah. So no, I totally agree with you. The innovation push needs also to come from the central regulator, and they need to kind of foster the ecosystem as well.
Yeah, and I saw a few days back, the governor of the central bank in India is saying, "We're behind you, fintechs." That was more or less the narratives, but let's put that into action.
Agreed. Yes, the problem there is that it has to be a balance of essentially protecting people's interest versus protecting innovation. Normally what happens is, if the innovation, in most other countries, this is a case wherein the regulator is always playing catch up with the innovation, right? Something new innovative will come out, it will go around for almost 6 months, a year. It will catch the regulator's eyes. They'll figure out what's happening. They'll have a panel of experts sit on it, brainstorm on it, try to figure out what part of it are actually beneficial for the customer, where can the most frauds and everything happen, and then try to converge it into a guideline or a white paper or an operating manual kind of a situation for fintechs, and then that guidelines will be imposed so that everyone adheres to it and the consumer interest is protected. And there is no, these kind of technologies essentially don't create monopolies, is also what they try to make it in such a way that existing businesses are not completely disrupted. So these this is a kind of a very difficult situation to balance for anyone, and I'm sure probably all the regulators are having really tough time with it. I mean, cryptocurrency is something that has been around since almost 6 years, and a lot of regulators are not able to figure out their stance on it.
Yeah, but India is a superpower in crypto. We
Yes,
see
definitely. It could
it
take away the
doesn't.
power from the government. It's as simple as that, if uncontrolled.
I mean, you can't control it. I mean, I think in one point of time, the regulator will have to say, okay, yeah, I mean, all those WYSIWYGs and Polygon, they're all coming out from India. I mean, you cannot. I mean, that's one of the things that the new opportunity for India. The regulator should be proud of that, and encourage them. I mean, this is an innovation that's coming out in India, and it's coming out big worldwide. A lot of entrepreneurs are looking out to them, and you should, find a place, to adopt it, not discourage them. Banks are not everything. I mean, these guys are creating a huge thing.
No, definitely, I completely agree with you on that. But probably one thing that really makes that difference is the trust factor that stays between the customers and the banks is not something that is being able to establish between the new age fintechs and the customers, right? So if that trust factor is not there, the adoption essentially kind of drops out, or only the most savvy people are benefiting from adopting these technologies, while the people who are not able to trust these entities kind of either are missing out or are being forced to adopt technologies or adopt fintech models that they're not trusting. So that is another equation that probably would need balancing as well.
Yeah, but we see Paytm, for example, they're doing quite very well. Razorpay, Bharat Pay, they're actually making a successful, big time models. I like everything, the public, needs to give trust and then, needs to give credit. And sometimes these things don't work out from the very first beginning. You need to be patient. Overall, I think they'll be quite successful. I think banks then don't have any other way than collaborating with those big fintechs.
True.
I think they'll acquire and adopt them.
No, I completely agree. I mean, if you ask me personally, the future would probably be more on the collaborative side rather than both of them operating or competing with each other or operating in an isolated silos. It will basically be a lot of collaboration between the fintechs and the banks going forward.
Yeah, and just to add on this, I think banks are trying to encourage, opening business units that are basically startups within the banks. But we haven't seen, this taking off. I know Citibank has tried this, but didn't hear of any good, successful initiative of a new product that came out from that, internal startup unit.
Agreed. I mean, it probably will take a lot of time for it to be taken seriously by the banks and kind of worked on that way. So when you talk about startup units, are you talking about accelerators over here, or are you talking about more about just fostering your own startup fostering an entire startup inside the bank's ecosystem?
Fostering, the second option, fostering the entire startup ecosystem within the bank. The bank would select, people who are working at the bank, and then encourage them to participate in to answer a few pain problems that the bank is having, and then he would invest time, and these people, they would not own the IP, the bank would, but they would get some kind of an experience as entrepreneurs.
So like basically an entire startup inside the bank working on a problem statement for them.
Exactly. Yes.
So I personally also haven't observed any specific this thing, like these kind of models really anything impactful, anything noticeable as of now come out of it as of now. We'll probably get to see in the next couple of years, hopefully.
Yeah. I mean, I think that would happen. Yeah.
But the main thing is that emergence of these kind of models, or at least the fact that banks are now ready to experiment with these kind of models internally and foster internal innovation, is also something that's really commendable, because that will at least enable a lot of what do you say, unstructured thinking, or probably, say differential thinking rather than the normal process oriented thinking that normally goes along in these banks, right? So that could probably, bring up a lot of new products.
Yeah, I think, banks, I think ICICI is the closest one, to doing this kind of a thing. They're putting a lot of efforts and resources on this.
Got it. I think this has been a really interesting conversation, Yatir. We probably are also out of time. Before we kind of close this, would want to hear from you. What are your views on next 5 years of fintech globally, as well as the markets that you're working in India, Israel? How do you see these markets evolving over the next 5 years or the next decade? What sector would you think dominate it, and so on?
So I'm quite bullish, on the crypto and the gaming element. I think this would be leading the new economy. I think, the combination of gaming and crypto is a major thing that, everybody should, pay attention to. I think it could, help economies, especially like India, but also in Africa. I think working, across Southeast Asia, India, and Africa, I see that, India is leading the innovation. Is even, I think, leading into by far some developed economies like even the US. There's a lot of a lot of room for innovation, in India, and encouraging the startup ecosystem. And I think once the crypto is much more settled and regulated in India, I think this could be like, the leading nation in the world around cross-border lending, cross-border payments, and, actually new models of banking that could evolve from India. In Africa, I think there's a lot to explore and discover. We're present in Nigeria and in Kenya. And Kenya having to, a leading superpower, a local superpower in lending. But unlike India, I think Africa is like 20 years behind India. There's some more room, for penetrations of technologies like smartphone and internet. But I think they have less problem with the regulator as in India. So maybe some kind of innovations can, succeed over there, but may not succeed in India. For one example is M-Pesa that we saw. It was quite successful in Kenya, but did not fly as expected in India. That's what I think. And for us, what we want to do, we basically want to innovate the entire credit space, become the next global alternative credit bureau. We think that, we can bring, unique unfair advantage, at least in the cross-border lending, and help students that are moving, for example, from India to the US and get credit, while others, those TransUnions and Equifax won't be able to do that.
Got it. No, I think that is super interesting. I completely agree with you on the African piece as well. I mean, Africa has a lot of opportunity since there is very little penetration as of now, and those probably are one of the most innovative people that I've seen. I mean, the kind of models that I've seen coming out of there, when you talk about fintech or when you even talk about renewable energy and lot of other pieces as well. I mean, those people are the most frugal entrepreneurs that I've seen around here, and that is probably the best kind of innovation, right? If the frugality is driving innovation, you will probably make sure that you are not essentially emphasizing a lot more on the bells and whistles, but probably on the core problem, and you're solving it in the most cost-efficient way. And that cost-efficient way is something that could be applied to a wider market versus a solution that is more cost-intensive, because that won't be applicable everywhere. So we'll probably have a more wider adoption. So I'm super excited, probably bullish on Africa as well. I would probably be more bullish on Vietnam as well. Vietnam, I've seen a lot of innovation coming in, but I think there is a room for a lot more. Vietnam and Philippines as well. And I think that's about it. Thank you so much. It was great having you here. Got to learn a lot and some great insights as well. Thank you so much for your time, Yatir.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Been a pleasure.